Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to listen today, especially given that I wasn't able to join you. I'm very sorry about that. As you're listening, I'll be on a night shift in hospital, so COVID is keeping things very busy. But thank you nevertheless for taking the time to listen to what I have to say on this very important topic. There's a huge amount that could be said about this topic, about abortion generally, and I have hours of lecture material on other parts of the debate, but I want to focus really specifically today on a claim that's often made about maternal mortality and abortion. This, you may have seen, is part of the report that came out, and it was a significant element claiming that a significant number of women die as a result of unsafe abortion, and that legalizing abortion is the best way to prevent that. Now, this is a common point of view, and it's a common argument that's been made all over the world for many, many decades, in fact. But it's actually rarely put to scrutiny, and it's rarely a topic that comes under empirical debate. It's normally just taken for granted, and people take the statistics for granted. And today I want to challenge that wisdom and suggest that actually the reality is quite different from what you've probably heard. So here's how the argument goes. And as I say, this argument is not unique to Jamaica. It's an argument that's been made in pretty much every single country in the world for many decades. It says that many women have abortions and many women die from these abortions every year. It says legalizing abortion won't increase the number of abortions, but it will reduce the number of women who die from unsafe, illegal abortions. And that's a reason to legalize abortion. It also sometimes says that women die from not receiving abortions, for example, if the pregnancy is endangering their life, and that doctors are at legal risk of performing abortions in these cases, and this allows women to die from preventable causes of death during pregnancy by not giving them abortions. What's really interesting is that this argument as a whole was actually responded to by the United Kingdom's Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists 50 years ago now, the year before abortion was legalized in 1967. The Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists actually fiercely resisted legalization of abortion in the UK and said it was completely unnecessary from a medical point of view. And they actually responded specifically to each of these main points in a report they put out the year before legalization. So taking that last point first, the idea that some women with life-endangering pregnancies can't have abortions, they say actually this was completely false in the UK. They said those who advocate major changes in the law governing induction of abortion do not always appreciate that current medical practice in the UK is not seriously hampered by the present legal position, which mostly forbidded abortion, except in the case of when a mother's life was at risk. And they said, we are unaware of any case in which a gynecologist has refused to terminate a pregnancy when he considered it to be indicated on medical grounds for fear of legal consequences. And the same is true today, wherever you go around the world. If you go to any country where abortion is illegal, there is almost always, even if not in statutory law, there is pretty much always an exception made within common law or within the judicial system for abortion where a woman's life is at risk. So this argument really doesn't work. The RCOG went on further. They talked about the inflated numbers of illegal abortions that people were inventing and fabricating. They said it's been stated that as many as 100,000 criminal abortions are induced in the UK each year. Some say even up to 250,000. But they say these and an earlier figure of 50,000 are without any secure factual foundation of which we are aware. The incidence of criminal abortion varies widely, but in the experience of many gynecologists working outside large cosmopolitan cities, the occurrence is relatively uncommon. Now, we see the same done today, that these figures are grossly exaggerated in pretty much every country in the world, and this is demonstrably so. In fact, the real figure in the UK at the time was likely around 10,000, and now it's 20 times that, 200,000 each year. And this is one of the many, many pieces of empirical evidence demonstrating very clearly, beyond any doubt, that pro-life laws that protect the unborn really do save unborn lives and prevent abortions from happening. They go on to the next argument, where they talk about abortions that are spontaneous. Now, what this means is essentially just a miscarriage. What we see in many countries, or pretty much every country around the world, is a mixing of induced abortions, what we generally would know as abortion, and miscarriages, which are also known as spontaneous abortions. And because some women go to hospital with miscarriages and are treated for complications of miscarriages, these are sometimes put down to induced abortions. And because these women have complications of miscarriages and sometimes die from miscarriages, this is a way of inflating the overall number of complications and deaths from abortion. So when you look at statistics saying that so many women have had complications or have died from abortions, you'll see that in almost every case, they fail to distinguish induced and spontaneous abortion. They group them together, and so they inevitably inflate the number of complications and deaths from induced abortion by wrongly attributing complications and deaths from miscarriages to induced abortion as well. And so this conflation of the two conditions and this resulting misestimation is the basis of almost every single contemporary estimate of illegal abortion rates and their complications and the mortality. The RCOG said at the time their impression was that no more than 1 in 5 abortions is induced, the ones that they saw in hospital, which meant that 80%, at least 80%, of the complications from abortion they saw in hospital were actually from miscarriages, but many people were attributing all of these to induced abortion, and so giving very skewed results. They move on to the next argument, and they talk about whether legalizing abortion actually helps the problem, and they suggest actually there's no evidence that this is the case. They say except in those countries where abortion on demand and without inquiry is permissible, i.e. abortion on demand for absolutely any reason whatsoever, the legalization of abortion often resulted in no reduction and sometimes a considerable increase in the number of illegal abortions. And the reason they say this is because when abortion is legalized, women don't suddenly just get legal abortions. They continue to get illegal abortions in large numbers, and we'll see some evidence of this later. This is the same today. They say in Hungary and Czechoslovakia, for example, where abortion was induced freely, the number of illegal abortions treated in hospital in 1961 was about the same as the years before abortion was legalized. So legalizing abortion didn't eliminate unsafe abortions, and it doesn't do so today. So we see the same pattern of argument today. We see people give very high estimates of the number of abortions and deaths from abortions. We see the claim that the law doesn't affect the abortion rate. We see the grouping together of spontaneous abortions, i.e. miscarriages, and induced abortions to generate radically exaggerated estimates of complications and deaths from abortions, and radically exaggerated estimates of the number of abortions as a whole. And we see the claim that legalizing abortion will stop these women from dying from abortion. Now, none of these are supported by the available empirical evidence. You might be able to find 1 or 2 cases in which some of these claims in some countries are true, but on the whole, this is not the pattern of the empirical evidence. There's no guarantee, for example, that legalizing abortion will prevent women dying from it, and we'll see why later. So here's the argument in the Jamaican context, and we see the exact same pattern here. We saw the report say that abortion is the 3rd leading cause of maternal death. Now, this is the paper they cite, which is a paper from just a few years ago. And you'll see that if you look at it kind of from a fairly superficial perspective, that abortion is, in a sense, one of the leading causes of death. You see at the bottom, abortion is one of the highest causes of death. But you'll also see immediately, if you look, that it's combined with other causes of death, like ectopic pregnancies, which do account for a significant number of maternal deaths. It's also including spontaneous abortions, and the authors are very clear about this. So again, what you see is that induced abortion is put together with spontaneous abortion and ectopic pregnancies, both of which cause a significant number of deaths, in order to inflate the category as a whole, to make abortion as a whole the 3rd leading direct cause of death. Of course, when you split those causes up, you find that they're actually not the leading causes of death. So the estimates now for deaths from induced and spontaneous abortion put together in Jamaica are about 2 deaths a year. And that would make it, according to these statistics, the 6th or 7th leading cause of maternal death. If you split induced and spontaneous abortion up further, and we're just saying that they account for about half of the deaths each, just as a rough estimate because we don't have reliable figures, then induced abortion alone would only be the 10th cause of maternal death, and would account for, in fact, a very, very small proportion of maternal deaths, a couple of % at most. And so this is the same pattern that we've seen in many other countries, and it's the same misleading argument and misleading use of statistics that we're now seeing in Jamaica. You can see actually from a separate paper by the same authors that ectopic pregnancy did indeed account for a significantly higher number of deaths than abortion did. So this was in 2008. Of the 7 deaths attributable to abortion as a wide category, 5 of those were actually from ectopic pregnancies, and only 2 were from induced and spontaneous abortions, and we don't know if either of those were actually resulting from induced abortions. And so really these statistics are not at all reliable, and the number of deaths from induced illegal abortion is very, very low, and we don't have very reliable statistics, but we know that it's at most about 2 a year. Now this has an implication for the estimates for the number of abortions as a whole, because if 2 women die a year at most from induced and spontaneous abortion combined, and if 22,000 induced abortions occur every year, as the report suggested as an upper estimate, that would make the mortality risk of illegal abortion at most 1 in 11,000. But if that's true, this would make so-called dangerous illegal abortion far, far safer than pregnancy in many developed countries, where the mortality risk in pregnancy is about 1 in 10,000. And so this is completely implausible. There's just no way that dangerous, unsafe, illegal abortion is significantly safer than pregnancy in the United Kingdom and in the United States. If it were that safe, then there really wouldn't be a huge problem to be solved by legalizing abortion, because pregnancy on the whole is extremely safe. And this just demonstrates, I think, how implausible these estimates are. I looked into the way they generated these estimates, and I have to say the methodology and the sources are very, very unclear. If they are using the standard methodology for these estimates, then that methodology has been shown time and time again to generate implausible estimates and to not be a reliable methodology. So I don't think we have any good reason to believe that these estimates are at all credible. I think the number of induced abortions in Jamaica each year is significantly fewer. Well then, of course, there are still some deaths from unsafe abortion in Jamaica each year, we assume. As I said, the number that's estimated now is 2 deaths a year from illegal induced abortion and miscarriage combined. So it's possible that some of these deaths, or many of these deaths, are in fact from miscarriage, but it's impossible to really know definitively. Let's assume, to be generous to the pro-abortion case, that both of these deaths each year result from unsafe abortion. That's very likely not true, but let's use that as a generous estimate. Those women's lives still matter, and so we still have to ask the question, will legalization help this situation? Now, there are actually many reasons to think no. The first, of course, is that abortion mortality is already extremely low, and far lower than many people suggest. A second reason is that illegal abortion has become much, much safer than in the past. This is mainly a result of the increased use of medical abortion through misoprostol, or sometimes mifepristone as well. And actually, even where abortion is legal, there is a move towards self-management of abortion, i.e. backstreet abortions in a way that is approved of by the health authorities. So in England, for example, you don't have to see a doctor to have an abortion at the moment. You can speak to them by video, you can be sent the abortion pills and have the abortion at home in most cases. And this is deemed to be safe by the health authorities. Well, if this is safe, then it's difficult to see how illegal abortion using pretty much the same mechanism could be much more dangerous. There are debates about whether the dosage will be right and whether the information that women get will be right, but there are concerns about this in many countries, even where abortion is legal. And so given that medical abortion is very, very widespread throughout the pro-life world, it's actually difficult to believe that unsafe abortion will continue to be very unsafe. And in fact, we see time and time again that deaths from abortion reduced to almost zero long before abortion was legalized in most countries. The third reason is that quality post-abortion care is sufficient to prevent most deaths from abortion. So most deaths from abortion can be treated or can be prevented as long as women have access to emergency care and can be treated for hemorrhage and infection. And that's why, for example, in Poland, there are virtually no deaths from illegal abortion, even though abortion is mostly illegal there. It's because women who do have abortion relatively safely and can get follow-up care when they need it if things do go wrong. A fourth reason to think that legalization won't help is because even when abortion is made legal, women still seek illegal abortions from other sources. And there are many examples of this. The Royal College reported this 50 years ago, and just last year there are multiple academic papers making the same point, that women still seek illegal abortions even when it's made legal. This is mainly for privacy reasons. And then finally, there's empirical evidence from other countries. There are almost no examples of countries where the number of deaths from abortion has been substantially reduced beyond what would be expected as a result of legalization of abortion. The only example that people really use, there are a couple of other potential examples, but the main example people use is Romania. Well, Romania doesn't seem to work as an example because at the same time, Poland reversed its abortion law in the other direction. Poland criminalized abortion in the early 1990s and saw the same radical drop in the number of deaths from abortion and in the maternal mortality. And what this suggests is that Poland and Romania both had the same drop in deaths from abortion, not as a result of any policy change, but as a result of the fall of communism and various factors related to that. Likewise, in the Caribbean context, there's very little evidence that abortion deaths were substantially reduced after legalization in Guyana and Cuba. Guyana still has the second highest maternal mortality in the entire Western Hemisphere, only second to Haiti. And this is despite the fact that it legalized abortion about a quarter of a century ago now. There's actually reason to think legalization of abortion will make things worse for women, and here are some of those reasons. The first is that it's well documented and studies have repeatedly demonstrated that legalization of abortion leads to riskier sexual behavior. That is, people having sex with a riskier use of contraception or with no contraception at all, or having sex with partners with whom they don't want to become pregnant. And there's a mountain of empirical evidence suggesting that this is the case. And if this is the case, then it will naturally lead to more unwanted pregnancies and so to more abortions. And hence the risks of abortion, even if they stay the same or decrease, will be offset by the increase in the number of unwanted pregnancies and abortions. And there's a huge wealth of empirical evidence suggesting this. The second reason legalization can make things worse is because with more abortions, you have a higher risk of suicide and homicide. It's well established now that abortion is associated with a higher risk of suicide even after you control and adjust for all the other confounding factors. And as a result, abortion is associated with higher mortality rates than continuing a pregnancy. Other reasons legalization can increase the number of women of reproductive age dying is because it encourages delayed childbearing. So women will have pregnancies at later ages in their life, at which point pregnancy is many, many times more dangerous. Another reason is that abortion is associated with an increase in STDs, not because abortion causally causes the STDs, but because abortion legalization encourages risky sexual behavior, and that in turn increases the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases. And again, there's a wealth of empirical evidence demonstrating this, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a short while. Another reason is that there's a diversion of funds from emergency obstetric care. So the United Kingdom's international aid has been criticised for diverting funds from emergency care into family planning, and as a result, women have died from preventable causes because there's been a disproportionate focus on abortion. And then there are empirical cases, which we'll cover very briefly now. Just to talk very quickly about the mental health side of things, David Ferguson is the leading, or was the leading, authority on abortion and mental health. His research was considered the very best quality research in the world by pretty much everyone. And he came out with a meta-analysis just a few years ago saying that at the present time, there is no credible scientific evidence demonstrating that abortion has mental health benefits. In fact, he said the opposite. He said that there was a 28% increased risk of anxiety, a 70% increased risk of suicidal behavior, more than a doubling of the risk of alcohol misuse, and nearly a quadrupling of the risk of drug misuse as a result of abortion, compared with continuing an unwanted pregnancy. And these are the results after controlling and adjusting for all the other factors like previous mental health, socioeconomic condition, domestic violence, and so on. Even when you take those into account, abortion is associated with a significantly higher risk of all of these psychiatric disorders. As a result of this, we see that the suicide rate after abortion is many, many times higher than the suicide rate after continuing a pregnancy, and this data is from Finland. Likewise, I wouldn't normally talk about this, but the report mentioned the risk of crime and how crime can be reduced by legalizing abortion. Well, again, the Finnish data seem to say the opposite. The risk of a woman being the victim of homicide after an abortion is many, many times higher than the risk of a woman being homicide after continuing a pregnancy. And therefore, as a result of these factors primarily, the risk of dying within a year of the abortion is 3 times higher than the risk of dying after continuing a pregnancy. And that data again is from Finland. Now here's some empirical evidence of countries where legalizing abortion has made things worse. In Holland, abortion was legalized around 1966 to 1967, and although Holland had pretty much entirely eliminated deaths from illegal abortion before this point, in the year before legalization there was only 1 death due to abortion, and these, as I say, often include spontaneous abortions. Legalization massively increased that to 8 deaths a year. Now this quickly came back down to 1 and then 0 again. But what it did show is that those women in the intervening years didn't receive any benefit. In fact, it made things worse. Holland had pretty much eliminated the problem to begin with, and they made it significantly worse for a few years by legalizing abortion. The same is true in Rwanda. Just a few years ago, Rwanda changed its law in 2012. You see that the number of deaths, I think this is the percentage of maternal deaths due to abortion, in the years leading up to legalization was very, very low. It was about 3%. But when legalization occurred, for various reasons, this led to a massive increase, in fact, over a doubling of the proportion of maternal deaths due to abortion, so that the year after legalization, 7% of maternal deaths were a result of abortion. Finally, Ethiopia legalized abortion just a few years ago in 2006. What they found is that there was a massive increase in the number of legal abortions, but that the number of illegal abortions remained exactly the same. In fact, it also slightly increased by 5%. So all the legalization of abortion did was increase the number of abortions, while the number of illegal abortions didn't reduce by any significant amount. In fact, it actually increased. Moreover, they found that the severity of complications that were treated after legalization was significantly higher. They found that the proportion of women with organ failure and septic shock doubled over this time, and then further along from 2008 to 2014, things got even worse, with far higher rates of intensive care, usage, far higher rates of shock, and so on. And so legalization was only associated with an increase in the number of abortions and an increase in the severity of complications. And in one of these periods, the death rate increased as well. And one of the authors who talks about the changes in Ethiopia after the law says that these results show the difficulties that remain in eliminating unsafe abortion, even where the procedure is legal. Since 1972, and he's talking about a sub-Saharan African context, only Ethiopia, Ghana, Mozambique, Rwanda, South Africa, and Zambia have changed their abortion laws. But none of these countries have eradicated unsafe abortion, and many, like South Africa, have spent decades trying. So finally then, let's just come to some of the other health complications from abortion, which are fairly well established. The risk of preterm birth after an abortion compared to continuing a pregnancy is very well established and is not disputed by anyone. And actually there is a significant increase in the risk of preterm birth, and an even higher risk an even higher increase in the risk of very early preterm birth, i.e. before 32 weeks. So if you have one abortion, your risk of preterm birth increases by about 30%. If you have more than one abortion, it increases by between 50 and 90%. And as I say, those risk increases are even higher still when you're thinking about very early preterm births, which have significantly worse outcomes. The Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists suggest that this is possibly related to cervical trauma, so offering a causal mechanism. And it's been estimated that as a result of this in the US, abortion is responsible for 23,000 extra very early preterm births before 32 weeks and 2,000 cases of cerebral palsy as a result. And they estimate that over $1 billion in initial neonatal costs alone are a result of abortion in the US. And the WHO recognizes that preterm birth complications are actually the leading cause of death among children under the age of 5, responsible for about 1 million deaths around the world in 2015. As I said earlier, abortion legalization is associated with a massive increase in STD transmission as a result of people using contraception less or using it less efficiently, or simply having sex with more partners because they know that they have abortion as an insurance against pregnancy in these cases. So Jonathan Click from the US found that abortion legalization was associated with an increased risk of gonorrhea transmission and incidence of about 60%, a very significant increase in gonorrhea transmission. Now, the complications of gonorrhea include pelvic inflammatory disease, which can cause infertility. You can get ectopic pregnancies, you can get infertility from other causes, you can get miscarriages and premature labor. And Click estimates that this costs the US $300 million a year from the increase of gonorrhea alone. If you extrapolate that to all STDs, including HIV and AIDS in particular, there's up to a $4 billion annual cost of treating STDs, which is purely attributable to the legalization of abortion in the US. Not to mention, of course, the loss of life and the loss of healthy function and the devastating losses that can arise from STDs, particularly HIV and AIDS. And so finally, coming to the direct complications, it's often claimed that abortion, when performed legally and safely, is a very, very safe procedure with very, very few complications. Now, it is of course true that very few people die when abortion is performed in the best possible conditions, but nevertheless the complications are still much more prevalent than the report suggests. Finnish data again suggests that 20% of people having medical abortion had adverse events as a consequence. Most of these were hemorrhage, so 15% of women having medical abortions had a hemorrhage, and 6.7% of them had an incomplete abortion, which meant that they required surgical evacuation to prevent significant serious complications as a result of retained parts of the baby. And so again, these don't usually cause death, and usually these are resolvable. But the idea that abortion is a simple procedure with very few complications is not really true. A very significant proportion of women having medical abortion have adverse events and require treatment in hospital as a result. I'm very sorry again that I can't be there with you today. I don't want that to be an excuse or an opportunity for me to avoid questions or avoid scrutiny. I've tried to include the very short references in the slides, and I've tried to make it clear where my evidence comes from. But if any of you want to challenge that, or you're unsure about it, or you think that I've misrepresented the statistics, then of course I want to do my very best to respond to those concerns and to give you extra evidence that might be helpful in making up your own mind on these topics. I've tried to be as objective as possible and to suggest that actually, although there is this very common narrative that legalizing abortion doesn't increase abortions, but does save women's lives from unsafe abortion, this narrative was actually shown to be untrue over half a century ago by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. It remains untrue today. The exact same tactics are used, the exact same misrepresentations are used, and these are pretty demonstrable in most cases. There actually shouldn't be any objective debate that there is a significant misrepresentation of these figures and statistics that goes on in these debates. So I hope that you've learnt something. I hope that it's been a stimulating lecture, and I thank you once again for your considerable patience in allowing me to expand this argument, and I hope that you'll take it to heart and think twice the next time someone tells you that legalizing abortion is the best way to save lives. In fact, the opposite is true. The best way to save lives is to have laws that protect both the unborn child and protect her mother from the dangers and the risks of abortion. Thanks very much for listening.